At the restaurant, my daughter-in-law smashed my plate onto the floor and called me a witch. I just stood there. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and let me know where you're watching from. I'd like to see how far this story travels, because what happened that night didn't just break a plate. It broke something I had spent over 40 years building. I have always believed that family dinners were sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the quiet, unspoken way that people come together at the end of a long day, sit across from one another, and remember that they belong somewhere. That night was supposed to be one of those dinners. My son had called me 2 days earlier. "Mom, let's go out Friday night," he said. "Somewhere nice. Just us. Just us." Those 2 words stayed with me longer than they should have. Because for the past few years, just us had become rare. There was always something else. A work dinner. A last-minute plan. Or more often, her preferences. So when he invited me, I said yes before he even finished speaking. I spent more time getting ready than I care to admit. At 68, I don't dress to impress anyone anymore. Not the way I used to. But that evening, I chose carefully. A soft cream blouse. The one my late husband used to say made me look elegant without trying. A navy skirt that still fit just right. And a pair of low heels I only wore on special occasions. I even took out the small bottle of perfume he had given me on our 40th anniversary. I hadn't used it in months. The scent felt like a memory, something warm I could carry with me. "You look nice," I said quietly to my reflection. For a moment, I almost heard his voice answering back. The restaurant was one of those places with dim lighting and polished wood floors. The kind where conversations stay low, and everything feels just a little more important than it really is. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habits. I've always believed that being early is a sign of respect. I stood near the entrance, watching couples walk in together, laughing softly, brushing shoulders as if the world outside didn't exist. Then I saw them, my son and his wife, walking side by side, not looking for me, not until I stepped forward. "Mom," he said, surprised. "You're already here." Already here. As if I might not have come at all. My daughter-in-law smiled. That polished smile she wore in public. The one that never quite reached her eyes. "Hi," she said. Just that. No hug. No warmth. But I told myself not to read into it. I had made that mistake before, assuming distance where maybe there was just distraction. We were led to our table. A corner booth. Quiet. Slightly removed from the rest of the dining room. I liked it. It felt intimate. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight, we would talk the way we used to. The menus were thick, leather-bound. I barely looked at mine. I already knew what I would order. Grilled salmon. Steamed vegetables. Something simple. I've never needed much. Across from me, they were talking. Not to me. To each other. Plans. Schedules. Something about a trip they were thinking of taking. I listened quietly. Nodded when it seemed appropriate. Waited for a pause. An opening, something that would let me step into the conversation without feeling like I was interrupting. It didn't come. "Mom, are you going to order?" my son asked eventually. I blinked. "Oh yes, the salmon is fine." The waitress took our orders and left. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that stretches too long, until it starts to feel intentional. I tried again. "I was thinking," I said gently, "maybe we could have dinner at my place next weekend. I could make that roast you like." "That's not going to work." She cut me off. Not loudly, but sharply enough that the words didn't just stop. They fell, right there between us. I looked at her. She hadn't even glanced in my direction. Just took a sip of her wine, as if she hadn't interrupted anything at all. "I just thought," I began. "We're busy," she said, still not looking at me. My son shifted slightly in his seat, but he didn't say anything. Not then. Not yet. The food arrived. Plate set down carefully in front of us. The smell of garlic and butter filled the air. Normally, it would have made me smile. That night, it just felt heavy. I picked up my fork, took a small bite, chewed slowly, waited, because something in the air had changed. I could feel it, the way you feel a storm before it breaks. It happened so quickly, and yet I remember every second of it. I set my fork down for just a moment, just long enough to reach for my glass. And that's when she spoke again. "You really don't get it, do you?" Her voice was different now, colder, stripped of that polished layer she wore so well. I looked up. "What do you mean?" She laughed, not loudly, but just enough for the couple at the next table to glance over. "It means," she said, finally meeting my eyes, You keep showing up where you're not wanted." The words landed softly, but they cut deep. Before I could respond, before I could even process what she had said, her hand moved. Fast, deliberate. She grabbed the edge of my plate and shoved it. The porcelain hit the floor with a sharp, violent crack. Food scattered across the polished wood. The sound echoed louder than it should have in that quiet restaurant. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Eyes turned. All of them. Toward us. Toward me. "Which," she said. Clear. Loud enough this time. "You should have never come." I didn't move. Not right away. I just stood there, looking down at the broken pieces of my dinner, scattered like something careless, something disposable. Around me, the restaurant slowly came back to life. But not really. Because now, every glance carried something else. Curiosity. Discomfort. Judgment. I bent down. Carefully. Quietly. And began picking up the pieces. Not because I had to, but because I didn't know what else to do. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't panic. Or even anger. It was something colder. Something still. I waited for my son to say something. Anything. A word. A gesture. A simple "that's enough." But when I looked up, he was already looking away. And that, more than anything else, was when I realized this hadn't just happened. It had been waiting to happen. For a very long time. No obligation. No reason to come back. As I closed my purse, my daughter-in-law finally looked at me again. Really looked this time. There was something in her eyes. Not anger. Not even satisfaction. Something colder. Like she had been waiting for this moment, and was quietly pleased to see it unfold exactly as planned. "Next time," she said, almost casually, "you should call before showing up." Next time. I almost smiled. Because in that moment, I understood something very clearly. There wouldn't be a next time. I nodded once. Not an agreement. Just acknowledgement. Then I turned and walked away. The restaurant door felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe it was just my hand. I pushed it open and stepped outside. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp. For a second, I just stood there, breathing. Inside, everything had been controlled, measured, contained. Out here, it was quieter, but not calmer. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, still. No trembling, no weakness, just stillness. 40 years. That's how long I had been a mother. Decades of birthdays, school mornings, late-night worries, quiet sacrifices no one ever sees. And yet, it had taken less than a minute. For all of it to be reduced to that. A broken plate on a restaurant floor. A word thrown across a table. Which, I should have felt angry, or hurt, or humiliated. Maybe I did. Somewhere beneath the surface. But what I felt most, standing there under the dim streetlight, was clarity. Because moments like that, they don't come out of nowhere. They build, piece by piece, silence by silence, excuse by excuse, until one day, someone stops pretending. And tonight, she had stopped pretending. The question was, why had I waited so long to see it? I didn't go home right away. I walked. Not far. Just down the block. Past the soft glow of restaurant windows and the quiet hum of Friday night conversations that had nothing to do with me. My heels clicked steadily against the pavement. One step, then another. Measured. Controlled. Like everything else I had done that evening. I found a bench a little further down the street. An old wooden one, tucked beneath a streetlight that flickered slightly every few seconds. I sat, folded my hands in my lap, and for the first time since the plate hit the floor, I let the silence settle. It's strange how the mind works in moments like that. You don't think about what just happened. Not at first. You think about everything else. Every small moment that didn't feel right, but that you chose to ignore. I thought about the first time she told me not to come over without calling. "It's just easier if you give us a heads up," she had said, smiling politely. At the time, it sounded reasonable. Respectful, even. But that heads up slowly turned into waiting for permission. And permission became silence. I thought about the holidays. The invitations that came later each year. The way plans were already made, and I was simply being informed. Just a small gathering this time. Nothing too big. Maybe next year, we'll do something together. Next year. There was always a next year. I thought about my grandson's birthday. How I had shown up with a carefully wrapped gift. Only to find the party already half over. "Oh, we moved it earlier," she had said lightly. "Didn't your son tell you?" He hadn't. And when I asked him later, he just looked confused. Said he thought I knew. At the time, I told myself it was miscommunication. Life gets busy. People forget things. It happens. But sitting there on that bench, under that flickering light, all those moments began to line up. Not scattered anymore. Not random. Intentional. I exhaled slowly. The air felt colder now. Or maybe I was just noticing it more. There's a difference between being forgotten and being excluded. It took me a long time to understand that. Too long. I replayed her words in my mind. You keep showing up where you're not wanted. Not you shouldn't have come. Not this isn't a good time. But you're not wanted. That wasn't frustration. That wasn't a bad day. That was clarity. And then something else surfaced. Something I hadn't paid enough attention to before. The way my son had been quiet. Not just tonight, but for a while now. He used to call me every Sunday. Without fail. Even if it was just for 5 minutes. Just to check in. To ask how I was doing. To tell me about his week. Then the calls became shorter. Less frequent. More distracted. Background noise. Other conversations. Her voice, sometimes, just out of reach, but always present. And then, eventually, they stopped. Not all at once. But slowly. Quietly. Like something fading instead of breaking. I remember the last time I called him. It rang longer than usual. When he finally picked up, his voice sounded distant. Hey, Mom. I'm kind of in the middle of something. I said it was okay. Told him I'd call back later. I didn't. Because something in his tone told me. I wasn't interrupting a moment. I was interrupting a life that no longer had space for me. I sat there for a long time. Long enough for the street to grow quieter. For the restaurants to begin emptying. For the world to move on from a moment that had just changed mine. And then, I said it. Out loud. Softly. Just to hear it. This wasn't an accident. The words felt strange at first. Heavy. But once they were there, they settled. Because if it wasn't an accident, then it was a choice. Not just hers. His too. That realization didn't come with tears. Or anger. Or even disbelief. It came with something much simpler. Something quieter. Acceptance. I wasn't standing outside their lives anymore by chance. I had been moved there. Gradually. Deliberately. And tonight, she had simply made it visible. I looked down at my hands again. Still steady. Still calm. For years, I had adjusted. Stepped back. Stayed quiet. Told myself it was temporary. That things would go back to the way they were. But they hadn't. And now I understood why. Because while I was trying to hold the family together, someone else had been carefully deciding where I no longer fit. The streetlight flickered again above me. Then steadied. I took a slow breath. Straightened my back. And for the first time that night, a different kind of thought entered my mind. Not why did this happen, but what am I going to do about it? I stayed on that bench longer than I planned to. Not because I didn't know where to go, but because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a hurry to return to a place that no longer felt like mine. When I finally stood up, the street was quieter. The kind of quiet that comes late in the evening, when most people have already gone home, when the world begins to slow down. I walked to my car, unlocked it, sat inside without turning the engine on. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Still steady, still calm. And that's when the memories came back. Not the recent ones. The older ones. The ones that used to make me smile. I saw my son as a little boy, 5 years old, standing in the kitchen in his pajamas, holding onto my leg while I cooked breakfast. Don't go to work today, he used to say. I want you to stay home with me. Back then, I thought love like that stayed. Changed shape, maybe. Grew quieter. But never disappeared. I remembered his first day of school. How he clung to my hand. How I knelt down and told him he'd be okay. You'll make friends, I said. I'll be right here when you get back. And I was. Every time. I remembered the nights he got sick. The way I stayed up beside his bed, checking his temperature, wiping his forehead, whispering that everything would be all right. Even when I was the one who was scared. Those things don't feel like sacrifices when you're a mother. They feel like life. Like something natural. Expected. I never kept track. Never thought I needed to. Then she came into his life. At first, I liked her. I really did. She was polite. Well-spoken. Always smiling. The kind of young woman people describe as put together. The first time I met her, she brought flowers. White lilies. I've heard so much about you, she said. And she said it in a way that felt sincere. Warm. Respectful. I remember thinking. He chose well. In the beginning, she included me. Invited me over. Asked for recipes. Even wrote things down in a little notebook while I showed her how to cook his favorite meals. He talks about your roast all the time, she said once, laughing. I don't think I'll ever make it as good as you do. I told her she didn't have to, that she'd find her own way, her own recipes, her own rhythm. And slowly, she did. At first, the changes were small, almost invisible. Let's not do Sunday dinners every week, she suggested one afternoon. Maybe just once a month. It'll feel more special. It sounded reasonable. So I agreed. Then it became holidays. Then only certain holidays. Then sometimes nothing at all. I told myself it was normal. People build their own families, create their own traditions. That's what I had done too. Once. But there was something else. Something quieter. Something I didn't name at the time. The way she spoke for him. Not always, but often enough. Wade doesn't think that's necessary. We've already made plans. He's really busy these days. At first, I didn't question it. I trusted her. Trusted that she was simply speaking on his behalf. But then I started noticing something. Whenever I asked him directly, his answers were shorter, less certain. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Maybe next time, Mom. We'll see. We'll see. It's a strange phrase. It sounds open, flexible, but most of the time, it means no. I leaned back in the driver's seat, closed my eyes for just a moment. The memories kept coming, but they felt different now. Not warm, not comforting, clarifying. Because what I had once seen as adjustment, as compromise, as the natural shifting of roles over time, was starting to look like something else. Something quieter, more deliberate, not a sudden break, but a slow, careful repositioning. I wasn't pushed out all at once. I was moved, conversation by conversation, decision by decision, moment by moment, until one day, I was no longer part of the picture. And tonight, she had simply removed the frame. I opened my eyes, looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The dim light from the street lamp cast soft shadows across my face. I looked older than I remembered, not just in years, but in understanding. For a long time, I believed that love, once given, protected you, that it created a kind of safety, a place where you could always return. But love, without respect, without boundaries, without awareness, it doesn't protect you. It exposes you. I took a slow breath, started the engine, because now, for the first time, I wasn't just remembering the past. I was seeing it clearly, and that changed everything. I didn't drive home immediately after starting the engine. I just sat there for a few seconds, listening to the low hum of the car, the soft ticking sound as it settled into idle. There's something about silence inside a car at night. It feels enclosed, safe, in a way, like nothing can reach you unless you let it. That's when a memory surfaced. Not dramatic, not loud, but sharp. It was about 6 months ago. A Sunday afternoon. One of those days that used to belong to family. I had called my son that morning. No answer. That wasn't unusual anymore, so I left a message. Just checking in, I said. Call me when you can. He didn't call back. By early afternoon, I decided to stop by. I had made a pot of soup the night before. Chicken and vegetable. His favorite when he was younger. I told myself I was just dropping it off. Nothing more. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed something right away. 2 cars. One I recognized. The other, I didn't. I hesitated. Just for a second. Then I picked up the container, walked to the front door, and knocked. Laughter. I heard it from inside. Light. Easy. Familiar. The kind of laughter that comes from people who feel comfortable together. I knocked again. This time, the laughter stopped. Not gradually. Suddenly. Footsteps. Then the door opened. It was her. She looked surprised. But only for a moment. Then that same polite smile appeared. The one I had seen so many times before. Oh, she said. You didn't call. I held up the container slightly. I did, I replied. This morning. I thought I'd just drop something off. Her eyes flicked briefly to the container. Then back to me. We have guests, she said. Not come in. Not join us. Just information. I won't stay. I said quickly. I just wanted to. That's probably best, she interrupted. Her tone wasn't harsh. That's what made it harder to recognize. It was smooth, controlled, almost practiced. I nodded, extended the container toward her. But she didn't take it right away. Instead, she stepped slightly to the side. Not enough to invite me in. Just enough for me to see past her shoulder. The dining table. Set. For plates. For glasses. My son was there. Sitting across from another couple. Laughing. Relaxed. He looked up. Saw me. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise. Then something else. Something quieter. Discomfort. Mom, he said. Just that. No movement to stand. No gesture to come closer. I was just dropping this off, I said, holding the container a little tighter now. Yeah, we're kind of in the middle of something, he replied. I nodded again. Of course you are. Finally, she took the container. Lightly, as if it didn't weigh anything. Thank you, she said. But the words felt automatic. Then she closed the door. Not slowly. Not gently. Just closed it. I stood there for a moment, looking at the door, at my own reflection faintly visible in the glass. And then I turned, walked back to my car, sat inside. I remember placing my hands on the steering wheel that day too, just like tonight. Back then, I told myself it wasn't personal. They had guests. It was bad timing. I should have called again, waited for a response. I explained it away, every part of it. The way the laughter stopped when I knocked, the way she didn't invite me in, the way he stayed seated, all of it, because it was easier to believe in misunderstanding than to consider something else. But sitting there now, after everything that had just happened in that restaurant, that memory didn't feel the same anymore. It didn't feel like bad timing. It felt like rehearsal, a smaller version of the same thing. A door closed, a space I wasn't allowed to enter, a moment where my presence shifted the air in the room. Only back then, they kept it quiet, contained. Tonight, they didn't bother. I exhaled slowly, rested my head back against the seat. There's a pattern to things like this. You just don't see it until someone stops hiding it. And once you do, you can't unsee it. I opened my eyes, looked ahead through the windshield. For years, I had been standing outside doors, knocking politely, waiting to be let in. Tonight, I finally understood something. Those doors were never locked. They were simply never meant to open for me. I finally pulled out of the parking spot. Slowly, no rush, no destination that felt urgent. The road ahead was nearly empty. Streetlights stretched out in a quiet line, one after another, casting soft pools of light on the pavement. I drove through them without really thinking, just moving forward, because stopping didn't make sense anymore. There's a certain kind of silence that follows realization. Not the heavy kind, not the kind filled with questions, but something clearer, sharper. For years, I had been asking myself the wrong things. Did I say something wrong? Was I too much? Did I come at the wrong time? Questions that always led back to me. But tonight, those questions felt unnecessary, because the answer had never been about timing, or misunderstanding, or even distance. It had been about permission, and somewhere along the way, without ever saying it out loud, they had decided I needed it. I stopped at a red light. The glow reflected softly across the dashboard. I rested my hands on the wheel, just like before, and I thought about all the times I had adjusted myself to fit into their world. Speaking less, asking less, showing up only when I was sure it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. Waiting, always waiting, for a call, an invitation, a moment where I would feel included again. But inclusion isn't something you beg for, and it's not something you earn by making yourself smaller. It's something that's given, freely, or not at all. The light turned green. I didn't move right away. The car behind me didn't honk, just waited. Eventually, I pressed the gas, moved forward. That's when something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice. But inside, something settled into place. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. There was no heat, no urge to go back and say something, to defend myself, to demand an explanation. Because explanations don't change decisions. And tonight had been a decision. Clear, public, final. I turned onto a quieter street, the kind lined with older houses and tall trees. Familiar, comforting, in a distant way. This was the route I used to take when my husband was still alive. We would drive together sometimes, no destination, just talking. Or not talking, just being in the same space without needing to fill it. Back then, silence meant peace. Tonight, it meant something else. Clarity. I realized something as I drove past those houses. Something simple, but important. I had spent years trying to hold on to a version of my family that no longer existed. The version where my son still called without hesitation. Where I was part of the plans, not an afterthought. Where showing up didn't feel like crossing a line. But that version was gone. Not suddenly, not violently, just gradually replaced. And I had been standing in between those two versions. Not fully in either one. That's why it had felt so confusing, so uncertain. Because I was still holding on, while they had already moved on. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine. The house was dark, quiet, exactly the way I had left it. I didn't get out right away, just sat there, one more time, letting the stillness settle around me. There's a moment, after everything becomes clear, when you have a choice. You can keep waiting, keep hoping that something will shift back, that people will remember who you were to them. Or, you can accept what's already been shown to you, not through words, but through actions. I looked down at my hands again, still steady, still calm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what they would do next, or what I should say, or how to fix anything, because there was nothing left to fix, only something to decide. I opened the car door, stepped out, closed it gently behind me, and as I walked toward the front door, one thought stayed with me. Not loud, not dramatic, but certain. I was done waiting. Not for an apology, not for an invitation, not for a place that had already been taken away. If they had decided where I stood in their lives, then it was time. I decided what they no longer had access to in mine. The house felt the same when I walked in. Quiet, still, exactly the way it had been for the past few years. But something inside me had changed. I didn't turn on all the lights like I usually did, just the one near the kitchen, a soft yellow glow that barely filled the room. I set my purse down on the counter, took off my shoes, placed them neatly by the door. Routine. There's comfort in routine, especially when everything else feels uncertain. But tonight, even the familiar felt different. I walked into the kitchen, stood there for a moment, looking at the table. It was set for one, not intentionally, just naturally. A single placemat, a single chair slightly pulled out, a habit I had formed without realizing it. I reached out and adjusted the chair, pushed it back in, perfectly aligned. Then I stopped, because for years, I had kept things ready, as if someone might walk in, sit down, join me, but no one ever did. I opened the refrigerator, looked inside, containers stacked neatly, leftovers portioned carefully, enough for days. I had always cooked like that, prepared, considerate, even when there was no one to consider. I closed the door slowly, leaning against it for just a second, and that's when I noticed it. The envelope. It was sitting on the edge of the counter, half tucked under a stack of old mail, something I hadn't paid attention to before. I reached for it, pulled it free. My name was written on the front, in handwriting I recognized. My son's. I frowned slightly, trying to remember when it had arrived. A few days ago, maybe, or longer. I hadn't opened it. That alone felt strange. There was a time when I would have opened anything from him immediately, without hesitation. Now, it had just been sitting there, waiting. I turned it over in my hands. Light, thin, not a letter, not really, more like a notice. I opened it carefully, slid the paper out, and for a moment, I just looked at it, not reading, just seeing, because something about the way it was formatted, the way the words were spaced, it didn't feel personal. It felt official. My eyes moved slowly across the page, line by line, and then they stopped. Regarding adjustments to property arrangements, I read that part again. Slower this time. Property. My grip on the paper tightened slightly. There were more words. Legal terms. Carefully chosen phrases that sounded neutral, but carried weight underneath. In consideration of future planning, recommended restructuring, beneficiaries, I lowered the paper just a little. Took a breath. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. Already written. Already prepared. And I hadn't been part of it. I read further. More carefully now. There was mention of the house. My house. The one I had lived in for over 30 years. The one I had shared with my husband. The one that still held pieces of him in every room. Transfer options, shared ownership, long-term management. The words blurred slightly for a moment. Not from emotion. From recognition. Because suddenly, everything started to connect. The distance. The silence. The way I had been slowly moved to the edges. This wasn't just about discomfort, or personality, or family dynamics. This was about something else. Something practical. Something planned. I placed the paper down on the counter, carefully, as if it might break. And I stood there, in the quiet kitchen, under that soft yellow light, thinking. For years, I had believed that I was holding on to a family, trying to keep it together, trying to stay connected. But standing there, looking at that paper, I realized something else. They weren't just pulling away from me. They were preparing to move forward, without me, and not just emotionally, structurally, legally. I let out a slow breath. There's a moment when confusion turns into understanding. And once it does, you can't go back. I picked the paper up again, folded it neatly, placed it back into the envelope. Not because I was done with it, but because I knew This wasn't something to react to. It was something to respond to. And that required something different. Not emotion. Clarity. I looked around the kitchen again. At the table. At the quiet space I had kept open for so long. And for the first time, I didn't see a place waiting for someone else. I saw something else entirely. Something that belonged to me. Something I had built. Protected. Maintained. Without realizing how much of it was still in my control. I turned off the kitchen light. Stood there in the dimness for a second. And one thought settled in, calm and certain. They had made their plans. Now, it was time for me to make mine. I didn't go to bed right away that night. Sleep didn't feel necessary. Instead, I turned the kitchen light back on, pulled out a chair, sat down. The envelope was still there, right where I left it. I opened it again, this time slower, more deliberate, not as someone surprised by what she was reading, but as someone trying to understand what had already been set in motion. The words hadn't changed, but the way I saw them had. Recommended restructuring, shared ownership, future security. They sounded careful. Responsible, even. But underneath all of it, there was one simple truth. They were trying to move pieces around, and I was one of them. I reached for the drawer beside me, opened it. Inside were folders, neatly organized, labels written years ago, utilities, insurance, bank statements, and one folder, slightly thicker than the others. I pulled it out, placed it on the table. Property documents. I hadn't looked at them in a while. There had never been a reason to. Everything had always been understood, clear, settled, or so I thought. I opened the folder, flipped through the pages. There it was, the deed, my name, and my husband's. No additions, no changes. I traced the line lightly with my finger, just to be sure. Still the same. I leaned back slightly, let that settle in. Because if the house was still in my name, then whatever they were planning, it hadn't happened yet. Not officially. That mattered. I continued flipping through the documents. Mortgage records. Paid off. Years ago. Insurance. Up to date. Everything in order. No gaps. No missing pieces. Which meant, whatever they were doing, they were preparing, not acting. Yet, I closed the folder gently, rested my hands on top of it. And then I thought about something else. The timing. The distance hadn't started yesterday. The silence hadn't begun last week. This had been building, step by step. Less contact, less involvement, less presence, until there was enough space to make moves without me noticing. I stood up, walked over to the cabinet near the hallway, opened it. Inside more files, older ones, wills, trusts, documents I hadn't touched since my husband passed. I hesitated for a moment, then took them out, placed everything on the table, side by side. The house felt different now, not quiet, not empty, focused, like something important was finally being seen clearly. I opened the will, read through it, carefully. My husband had been thorough, always had been. Everything outlined, everything accounted for, and just like I remembered, everything had been left to me, not shared, not divided. Mine. I closed the document, slowly. For years, I had treated that as something symbolic, a gesture of love, trust. But sitting there now, it felt like something else. Responsibility. Protection. Not just for the past, but for what came next. I looked back at the envelope again. Future planning, yes. They were planning. But they had made one mistake. They assumed. I wasn't. I walked to the sink, poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip. No rush. No panic. Just clarity. Because now the picture was complete. The restaurant. The words. The silence. The distance. And this. It wasn't separate events. It was one story. And I had finally reached the part where everything made sense. I placed the glass down, turned off the kitchen light again. But this time, the darkness didn't feel the same. It didn't feel like something closing in. It felt like something settling, waiting. Because the next move wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. The next morning, I didn't feel tired. Not the way I should have after a night without sleep. I felt steady. There was no rush in my movements. No heaviness in my chest. No second guessing. Just a quiet sense of direction. I made my coffee the same way I always did. Measured. Routine. But this time, I didn't carry it to the living room. I stayed in the kitchen. At the table. The documents were still there. Neatly stacked. Exactly where I had left them. I sat down, took a sip, and reached for my phone. For a moment, I just looked at it. At his name. There was a time I would have hesitated. Wondered if it was the right moment. If he was busy. if I might be interrupting something. Not anymore. I pressed call. It rang twice. Mom, he answered. His voice sounded normal, casual, as if nothing had happened. Good morning, I said. My tone was calm. Even. Morning, he replied. Everything okay? I paused. Just briefly. Yes, I said. Everything is clear. There was a slight silence on the other end. Not long, but enough. I wanted to ask you something, I continued. Sure. The letter you left here. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, that, he said. Yes, that. I read it, I said. Okay, he replied quickly. We were going to talk to you about that. It's just planning. Nothing urgent. Planning. I let that word sit for a second. I see, I said. He continued. It's just about making things easier long term. You know, less stress, more structure. We thought it would be good to organize things now. We. Not him. Not a conversation. A decision already shared. Already agreed on. Did you? I asked softly. Another pause. Yeah, he said. I mean, it makes sense, right? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked down at the documents in front of me. The deed. The will. The life that had been built long before any of this. Tell me something, I said. Okay. Was I ever part of that conversation? Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Just silence. I mean, he started, we were going to include you. We just wanted to have something prepared first. Prepared. So I could be presented with it. Not included in it. I understand, I said. And I did. More than he realized. Because in that moment, everything aligned perfectly. The restaurant. The words. The distance. And now this. It wasn't separate. It was a progression. Are you upset? He asked. The question came carefully. Cautiously. I almost smiled. No, I said. And it was the truth. I wasn't upset. Upset comes from confusion. From unmet expectations. But I didn't have those anymore. I just wanted to be clear, I continued, about where things stand. Mom, it's not like that. It is, I said gently. Not interrupting. Not arguing. Just stating. There was something in my voice that made him stop. I had heard that before. Years ago, when he was younger. It was the tone that meant. This wasn't a discussion. I've reviewed everything, I said. Okay. And I understand your intentions. Another pause. But I won't be making any changes. The words were simple, but they landed. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, I said, the house, the property, everything outlined in that letter will remain exactly as it is. Silence again, this time heavier. Mom, we're just trying to help, he said. Help. I looked around the kitchen, at the table I had sat at alone for years, at the space I had maintained. Protected. I know, I said. And again, it was the truth. But help, without respect, isn't help. It's already taken care of, I added. What is? He asked. The future. He didn't respond right away, because he didn't understand yet. Not fully. And that was all right. He would. I have somewhere to be this afternoon, I said calmly. Where? He asked. I picked up my coffee. Took one last sip. Just taking care of a few things, I replied. Then I added quietly. Things I should have taken care of a long time ago. I ended the call before he could say anything else. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to explain. I placed the phone down, looked at my reflection faintly in the kitchen window. For years, I had been present in their lives, but invisible in their decisions. Today, that changed. Not because they saw me differently, but because I finally saw myself clearly. And once that happens, you don't ask for a place anymore. You decide it. I didn't wait long after that call. There was no reason to. For years, I had delayed things. Put them off. Told myself there would be a better time. A calmer moment. A more appropriate conversation. But clarity doesn't wait. And neither did I. By noon, I was already out of the house. The drive felt different from the night before. Not heavy. Not uncertain. Purposeful. The sky was clear. Bright in that quiet, ordinary way. The kind of day where nothing seems out of place. But inside, everything had shifted. I parked in front of a small office building, one I hadn't visited in a long time. The sign was still the same. Simple. Unassuming. I walked in. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, I replied. My name is Margaret Hayes. I have an appointment. Saying my full name out loud like that, it felt grounding. Like I was stepping back into something I had slowly stepped away from. Of course, she said, checking her screen. He's expecting you. Of course he was. Because this time, I hadn't waited for someone else to arrange things. I had made the call myself. A few hours earlier, right after I hung up with my son. Mrs. Hayes, the lawyer said as he stepped into the lobby. Older now, grayer than I remembered, but still sharp, still observant. It's been a while. It has, I said. He gestured toward his office. Come in. The room hadn't changed much. Bookshelves lined the walls. Folders stacked neatly. A desk that had probably seen decades of decisions. I sat down across from him, placed my bag on the chair beside me. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. That's something I had always appreciated about him. What would you like to review today? He asked. I took a breath. My estate, I said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He nodded, reached for a file. I assume you're referring to the documents we finalized after your husband passed? Yes, I said. And you'd like to make adjustments? I paused, just briefly. Then I answered, yes. He opened the file, flipped through the pages. Everything is currently structured to pass to your son, he said. I knew that. Of course I did. Back then, it had felt natural. Obvious. There had never been a question. Family stays within family. That's what I believed. But belief, without awareness, can be misplaced. I'd like to change that, I said. He looked up, not surprised, just attentive. What would you like to put in place instead? I folded my hands on the table. For a moment, I thought about everything. The restaurant, the broken plate, the words she used, the silence from my son, the letter, the plan, all of it. And then I spoke. I want to ensure that everything I've built is protected, I said. He nodded slightly. And distributed intentionally. Of course, he replied. We went through everything, piece by piece. The house, the accounts, the assets accumulated over a lifetime. Nothing rushed, nothing emotional, just decisions. Clear, measured. At one point, he paused. Are you certain? He asked. Not questioning me, just giving me space. I met his eyes. Yes, I said. And I meant it. Because this wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about anger. It was about alignment. About making sure that what I had reflected what I now understood. By the time we finished, the structure was different. Not dramatic on the surface, but fundamentally changed. Nothing would move without my say. Nothing would be assumed. Nothing would be taken quietly. Everything would be decided by me. He closed the file. I'll have the updated documents ready for you to review and sign, he said. Thank you, I replied. I stood up, picked up my bag, and for a moment, I just stood there, not because I was unsure, but because I was aware of what had just shifted. For years, decisions had been made around me, without me, quietly, gradually. Today, that stopped. I walked out of the office, back into the sunlight. The air felt different, not lighter, clearer, because the truth is, power doesn't disappear. It's given away, little by little, until one day, you forget it was ever yours. But it was, and it still is. You just have to decide to take it back. I didn't call him after leaving the office. There was nothing left to explain. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a reaction, but it came anyway. That evening, my phone rang. I was sitting in the living room, the same chair I had sat in for years. A book open in my lap, unread. I looked at the screen. His name. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hello. His voice came quickly, a little tighter than usual. Mom, what's going on? Straight to the point. I closed the book, placed it gently on the table beside me. What do you mean? I asked. There was a pause. Then, I got a call, he said. Of course he did. Not from me. From the only place that mattered now. My lawyer's office said you've made changes, he continued. They wouldn't give details, but they said I should speak with you. I leaned back slightly in the chair. I see, I said. Mom, why didn't you talk to me first? There it was. Not what did you decide? Not are you okay? Why didn't you tell me? I let that sit for a moment. I did talk to you, I said calmly. What? This morning. Silence. You mentioned a plan, I continued. Something already prepared. Something I wasn't part of. That's different, he said quickly. Is it? I didn't ask it out loud. Instead, I let the quiet stretch just enough for him to hear himself. We were trying to help, he added. Help. That word again. I looked around the room. At the furniture I had chosen. The walls that had held decades of memories. I believe you, I said. And I did. In his own way. He probably thought he was. But intention doesn't erase impact. Then why would you do this? He asked. His voice had changed now. Less controlled. More unsettled. I took a slow breath. Because things are clear now, I said. What does that even mean? It means I finally stopped guessing. But again, I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I chose something simpler. It means I'm making decisions for myself, I said. There was a longer pause this time. And what about me? He asked. The question was quiet, but heavy. Not angry. Not yet. Just uncertain. I thought about that. Not emotionally. Not reactively. Just honestly. You'll be fine, I said. It wasn't cold. It was true. Because he had already built a life. A structure. A system that didn't include me. This just made it official. Mom, he started. And for a moment, there was something in his voice. Something familiar. Not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be. Hesitating. Unsure. But it didn't last. Because behind that hesitation, there was something else. Expectation. The belief that this could still be adjusted. Shifted back. Rearranged. Like everything else had been. Is this about what happened at dinner? He asked. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because of how small that sounded now. As if the plate, the word, the silence, were the cause, not the result. No, I said. Another pause. Then what is it about? I looked down at my hands, resting calmly in my lap. It's about understanding, I replied. Understanding what? That I'm not part of your decisions anymore. The words were quiet, but they didn't waver. That's not true, he said. I didn't argue, didn't correct him, because this wasn't about convincing him. It was about acknowledging reality. You didn't need me in that conversation, I continued. And that's all right. Mom, that's not. It is, I said gently. And this time, he stopped, because something in my tone made it clear. This wasn't something he could talk around. For years, I had adjusted to make things easier, quieter, more comfortable for everyone else. But now, there was nothing left to adjust. Things are just different now, I added. The line stayed quiet. No immediate response. No correction. Just space. And in that space, something settled. Not between us, but within me. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to understand, or agree, or fix anything. I had already moved forward. I have some things to take care of tomorrow, I said. A simple statement. A closing one. Mom, I'll talk to you later. And before he could respond, I ended the call. Not abruptly. Not emotionally. Just completely. I placed the phone down. Sat back in the chair. The room was quiet again. But it didn't feel empty. It felt settled. Because sometimes, closure doesn't come from the other person. It comes from the moment you realize you don't need anything else from them. A week passed. Then another. No dramatic confrontations. No unexpected visits. Just distance. The kind that had been there for years. But now, finally, had a name. I kept my routine. Morning coffee. Quiet afternoons. Evenings that belonged entirely to me. But something was different. Not in what I did. In how I felt. There was no waiting anymore. No checking my phone. No wondering if I had said something wrong or missed something important. Because I already knew. One afternoon, I found myself back at that same restaurant. Not planned. Not intentional. I had been running errands nearby. And somehow, I ended up there. I stood outside for a moment, looking through the glass. The same soft lighting. The same quiet conversations. The same polished floors. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I walked in. The hostess greeted me with a polite smile. Table for one. I nodded. She led me to a small table near the window. Not the corner booth from before. That one was already taken. I didn't mind. I sat down, picked up the menu, and for the first time, I actually read it. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. When the waitress came, I ordered calmly. Grilled salmon, steamed vegetables. The same meal, but not the same person. As I waited, I looked around the room. People talking, laughing, leaning into each other like they belonged. I used to think that was everything. Belonging. That if you had it, you were safe. But now, I understood something else. Belonging without respect is just another form of silence. My food arrived, set down carefully in front of me. No tension, no hesitation, just a simple meal. I picked up my fork, took a bite. Warm, balanced, exactly as it should be. I ate slowly, not because I was trying to hold on to the moment, but because I didn't need to rush through it. There was no discomfort to escape, no silence to fill, just presence. Halfway through the meal, I noticed something. At the far side of the restaurant, near the entrance, my son and her, they had just walked in. For a moment, time didn't stop. It just continued. They saw me. Of course they did. You can't miss someone you've spent years trying to avoid. When they're no longer avoiding you. They hesitated, just briefly, then walked to their table, not near mine, but not far enough to pretend I wasn't there. I watched them for a moment. The way they spoke, the way she leaned forward, the way he nodded, familiar, but distant, like watching something I used to be part of, from the outside. And for the first time, it didn't hurt, because I wasn't outside anymore. I was simply somewhere else. I returned to my meal, finished it quietly. When the bill came, I paid without hesitation, left a tip, stood up, and as I walked past their table, I didn't slow down. I didn't look for eye contact, didn't wait for acknowledgement. But just as I reached the door, I heard his voice. Mom. I stopped, not because I needed to, but because I chose to. I turned slightly, looked at him. For a second, he didn't say anything. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he was waiting for something. An opening, a signal, something familiar. But I didn't give it to him. Not out of cruelty, but because that version of me no longer existed. I hope you're doing well, I said. My voice was calm, neutral, not distant, just complete. He nodded, slowly. Yeah, he said. You too. And that was it. No apologies. No explanations. Just two people, standing in the truth of what things had become. I gave a small nod, turned, and walked out. The air outside felt the same as it had that night. Cool. Still. But this time, there was no weight behind it. Because nothing had been taken from me. Not really. I had given too much. For too long. Without realizing I could stop. But I did stop. And in doing that, I didn't lose my place. I found it. Not in their home. Not at their table. But within myself. They thought I was weak. That I would stay quiet. Stay small. Stay grateful for whatever space they allowed me to have. They were wrong. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes, it's preparation. And when the moment comes, it becomes something else entirely. Something steady. Something unshakable. Something they never expected. I walked to my car, opened the door, sat down, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel it. Not sadness, not anger, just peace. Then I started the engine, drove away, and this time, I didn't look back.